This video is going to talk about considerations of bringing a PEC patterned individual to a left AIC patterned individual and then eventually to neutrality. First, what's the difference between the PEC pattern and the left AIC pattern? I've made my whole channel is about this, but in the PEC pattern, which is really a bilateral PEC pattern, the PEC is the posterior exterior chain, which means your back muscles. In that position, when the PEC chains on both sides are tight, they will hold the pelvis forward on both sides, along with the hip flexors on both sides. So you're in an extended position. In the left AIC pattern, only the left side is forward. Now, importantly, that means that when the left side comes forward, the pelvis usually turns overall to the right side. After that point, when that's going on for too long, then the right side may eventually come forward also, which now brings the pelvis forward on both sides, arches your back on both sides, and you're kind of in the middle, but still probably a little bit more to the right side. So the PEC pattern is just an added on compensation to the normal left AIC pattern. And that also means underneath every PEC pattern or bilateral PEC pattern where you have tight back muscles on both sides, that is resulting in bilateral anterior pelvic tilt, so on both sides, underneath that PEC pattern is still a left AIC patterned individual because we are all left AIC patterned individuals. That is because we have a bigger right diaphragm, which you see. That picture of the bigger right diaphragm is what causes the pull on the right side of the spine that's stronger to the right side than it is to the left. So over time, because of that stronger right diaphragm and the influence of respiration on the lumbar spine, because you can see how it attaches, in this picture you can see how it attaches to the lumbar spine, the right side is a lot bigger than the left, and because of that, our lumbar spine likes to turn to the right way more easily than to the left. And over time, that results in the left AIC pattern. And then eventually the right side might come forward also. And now we're in a PEC pattern, which will result in bilateral overactivity of the hip flexors and also your lower back muscles and mid back muscles on both sides. And in regards to the rib cage, this is the front, this is the back, becomes overextended, arched, and your body weight shifts forward a little bit at that point. So you're kind of anteriorly forward on your toes and you arch your back, and then your neck may come forward also into a forward head posture. In this position, when your back is overarched, all your back muscles, which you're going to see here, I'm going to go through a couple of them. Here you see the lats, the more superficial muscles on the back. Those lats are tight and overactive and holding you into extension because of how they attach to the pelvis through that thoracolumbar fascia at the bottom. They also attach to the spine. So they don't put you into extension, but they hold you into extension. That's why people who have really big, strong lats, they look great, but they really suffocate you because they keep you in extension and then they prevent you from expanding your rib cage when you breathe because you're locked into extension. Now you see the Quadratus Lumborum. They're actually they're considered abdominal muscles, although we think of them as back muscles. They have to let go. Again, they are holding you into a state of extension, either on one or both sides, in a PEC pattern on both sides. So usually both Quadratus Lumborums have to be turned off in a PEC pattern. And now you have the Paraspinals or Paraspinals. They go the length of the spine from the pelvis all the way up to the neck. Those muscles are always going to be tight in that PEC pattern also. Now this is where things can get tricky. Someone who is a PEC pattern, a bilateral PEC pattern, their pelvis will be forward on both sides. That means neither leg can adduct. And here you're seeing a picture of the adduction drop test. With my friend here, I'm showing the first picture. On the left is a picture where the right leg is not adducting, and then the second picture is a picture of where the leg is adducting. So the first one is a positive test, not in a good way. It means it's positive in the fact that it does not adduct, and then the second picture, it's a negative test, but negative in a good way, in that the leg does adduct. On a bilateral PEC, you're going to find someone, neither leg will adduct because they have overactive hip flexors and overactive back muscles, keeping that pelvis forward on both sides. And you'll also notice how when they come forward, the iliums also flare out. What that's doing is it's changing the relationship of the pelvis on top of the legs themselves, and that always has to be taken into account. It's much less about how the legs move underneath the pelvis and much more about how the pelvis moves on top of the legs. That's a really important point. And we call that acetabulum on femur external rotation. To get someone neutral, they need acetabulum and femur internal rotation. And that's what the techniques do to get you neutral. They're focusing on internal rotation of the body. Someone who's in a bilateral PEC pattern is in an externally rotated position. Their ribs are externally rotated, the iliums are externally rotated, their arms are externally rotated, and likely their legs are externally rotated also. They have an externally oriented body. And then when things are too externally rotated, everything tightens up and pulls to the center to try to keep you stable. Now, I went over this technique a couple weeks ago. I'm not going to go over it too much right now. I just want you to show that this is a type of technique. It's a bilateral technique. A bilateral PEC needs both sides restored, not just the left side. Both sides have to get into an internally rotated state to get out of the externally rotated state. You can't get out of extension until you can bilateral extension until you can get bilateral internal rotation. And that's an important point. So someone who's a PEC will not do well with a 90-90 hip shift. And I say this on my website. If you've ever looked at that beginner program, it says if you think you're a PEC, you have to start with two legs. Hip shifting someone's pelvis is like this. If someone's pelvis is like this, that is locking up. Their sacrum is getting locked up. See how all the compression is going to the inside, right through here? That's a locked up pelvis. They can't hip shift because neither side is positioned properly. So if you try to hip shift on someone who's a PEC, or even worse, a patho-PEC, it's not going to work well because they need both sides. They can't hip shift. The only thing, when they try to hip shift, they're going to use their back to do it, and it'll probably not feel good at all. So you can't hip shift a bilateral PEC or a bilateral patho-PEC. You have to get them to a left AIC pattern first. And so this technique, again, that is a bilateral technique that's attempting to internally rotate the pelvis, trying to internally rotate and flex the spine to get the ribs to internally rotate, internally rotates the arms, and internally rotates the legs at the same time. You're getting into a complete state of flexion and internal rotation, grounding yourself through your heels and the wall that's behind your back, allowing the wall to hold you up so your brain knows you're not going to fall. Getting into that internally rotated position and then breathing into your back so your rib cage can expand as the hamstrings are engaging and the adductors are engaging to get that pelvis to tilt backwards to get you into a state of neutrality. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is the right side will always restore first. So your ability to adduct will come first on the right side rather than the left side. There is a chance that this technique or a technique similar to this could get the pelvis into a neutral state on both sides, but more likely you'll probably get the pelvis from a bilateral PEC into a left AIC. So the right ilium will come into a more neutral state while the left side stays forward and out. So now you've got, if you redo the adduction drop test and now the right leg has the ability to adduct but the left leg doesn't, you've now taken that person from a bilateral PEC where neither leg could adduct because both of the iliums were forward and externally rotated, to now to a left AIC pattern where the right ilium is now neutral and the left side is not, which means the right leg has the ability to adduct and the left leg does not. I know that's kind of complicated. You might have to watch that a couple times, but that's the process. Now, if you look at this diagram, you're going to see the bigger right diaphragm, and you're going to, because of that bigger right diaphragm, and you'll notice the right hamstring is underneath that right diaphragm. The right hamstrings and the right adductors will re-engage appropriately because of the bigger right diaphragm and because our brain loves to see visual space over on the right side more than the left side. So our bodies are programmed to be right dominant. So that's why the right side restores first. And so now you can adduct the right leg a lot faster, or faster than you'll be able to adduct the left leg. So when you're dealing with PEC, they have to have PEC techniques, a bilateral PEC. They have to have PEC techniques. They need both sides restored. If they only, like the techniques on my website I say are for a basic left AIC, right BC patterned individual, not for PEC and not for patho-PEC. I do have a section that says if you think you're PEC, and I also give you some tests that you can do when you put both feet on the wall. Do you feel your hamstrings? If not, and then you do them individually. If not, if you don't feel the hamstrings or you only feel one hamstring, you got to start with the PEC type of techniques. Otherwise, you're going to try to use your left side, but it's not going to work. It's going to be compensatory because your pelvis will not get out of this bilateral PEC pattern. You have to establish the right side probably first, and then move to the left side. And then you start working on the left side, strengthen the left side, and then you start to use the right side again, like the right glute. So you got to go from PEC to left AIC, get the left side neutral, work on the left side, and then start to use the right glute. Because anyone who's a bilateral PEC is probably going to have very weak left side musculature. Left adductor, left hamstring, left glute med, left abs are going to be really, really weak. So there is a specific kind of algorithm to it. It's just really difficult to do that on your own without being tested. But hopefully this video can explain to you why people need to go from in a logarithmic sequence from a PEC to a left AIC and then eventually to neutral, and then you can start working on one side or the other. If you thought this video was helpful, could you please like it, comment, and subscribe to the channel? I'd appreciate it. Thanks.